While the price of everything aggressively rises all across the nation, incomes are stagnating and America's middle class is steadily shrinking. Millions of middle-income earners are having to spend a larger share of their monthly budgets to afford soaring daily necessities. As the gap between the rich and the rest of us gets wider, more and more people who used to have comfortable lives are now struggling to afford the bare minimum. Over the past few years, accommodative monetary policies have helped to debase the value of our currency. Adding that to the worst inflation in 4 decades, Americans' purchasing power has never been lower. Economists say that a perfect storm of events is aggravating the situation. Supply chain disruptions are causing shortages of everyday staples and pushing prices to skyrocket. That's affecting the food we put on our tables, the national housing supply, and the price of vehicles and electronics. On top of that, a global energy crisis is sending oil prices through the roof and resulting in a steep increase in the cost of gasoline, natural gas, and essentially all energy forms our society needs. The impact of the 7% increase in inflation is making the vast majority of our population experience some level of financial distress. Even those whose incomes surpass the national average are reporting difficulties to make ends meet and have been taking on more debt than ever before. Already vulnerable groups have been hit the hardest. Families that faced a job loss or an unexpected medical bill were forced to deplete their savings and now do not have any financial cushion to fall back on. Households that typically had stable finances and lifestyles are currently having to make some painful choices. They're substituting the products they used to consume with cheaper options, driving less to save on gasoline, curbing on spending, using more their credit cards, and moving to less expensive areas in a compromise to afford to live in a country where everything is getting significantly more expensive. However, those who are able to make these changes intended to minimize the impact of inflation on their lives are still amongst the privileged. Many others who are living paycheck to paycheck haven't been so lucky, and they've been falling off the U.S. middle class by the millions. The stunning rise in the cost of living is a potentially disastrous problem for our economy, and it's affecting as many as 61% of Americans. While the difference between the rich and the rest of the population is abysmal, the gap between middle-income earners and low-income earners is actually dismal. In essence, these are the groups that will ultimately pay our way out of the economic recession brought on by the health crisis and the ineffective policies issued by our so-called leaders. The U.S. working class is standing to take the brunt of inflation, and the financial losses faced by this group over recent years have left many without savings. At a time, many are having to spend a greater portion of their incomes on essentials like food and shelter, and others are being pushed to spend more than they earn just to get by. Without the buffer of emergency savings, an unexpected car repair or a 25% increase in the heating bill can push many households over the edge. Those earning about $24,000 to $45,000 a year are defined as low-income workers. They spend roughly 110% of their income each year. Middle-income workers are represented by those earning about $45,000 to $76,000 a year, and on average they spend 89% of what they earn in a year. But recent numbers show that the share of middle-income workers spending more than they earn is rising at an alarming pace. That's happening because they've been taking on more and more debt to pay their monthly expenses. Economists explain that amassing debt can have long-term compounding effects, especially when you're unable to pay it down quickly or at all. even though spending almost 90% of their income, are only one unexpected medical bill or sharp gas price increase away from resorting to using credit cards or high-interest loans to pay their bills. They're left with little or no choice as the costs of many essential goods and services continue to surge higher with each passing month. Consumers are dealing with across-the-board price hikes, from groceries to gasoline. The persistent increases are making it impossible for household income to keep up with the pace of a higher overall cost of living. Over the past 2 years, median income dropped 4%, while the cost of living rose nearly 7%, partly due to rising housing and medical costs. More than 1/3 of Americans have reportedly said that their financial situation has gotten worse over the past year. That's why, today, the average U.S. household owes $155,622 in debt, or more than $15 trillion altogether. That includes debt from credit cards, mortgages, home equity lines of credit, auto loans, student loans, and other household obligations, a 6.2% increase from a year ago. Just as lower-earning households, middle-class workers are having to spend less on food out of necessity, considering that the cost of everything else is also impacting their budgets. Overall, while low-income households spend about 14% of their monthly budgets on food, middle-class families are right behind, spending 12%. Therefore, when prices go up, this means that these groups, two working groups that actually constitute the very foundation of our economy, are less likely to consume the goods and services they provide to our society through their work. They lose their ability to afford more than the essential, and as their debt compounds, many risks falling into a poverty spiral. Just over the past 12 months, food prices have spiked over 30% all across the globe, and several food manufacturers are announcing further price increases on top of the previous ones. According to the Consumer Price Index from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, food prices have faced the largest year-over-year growth since 1990. A family that used to spend $500 per month on groceries in 2019 is now spending roughly $637 depending on the state. Now, that's a big difference for people with stretched budgets. Additionally, housing costs have exploded in the past 2 years, jumping nearly 20% nationally and up to 37% in some states, which is undoubtedly making home buying more and more unaffordable. The conditions are becoming increasingly challenging for first-time homebuyers who are having to compete with wealthy investors who are willing to do whatever it takes to win, explained Redfin's Darryl Fairweather. In Florida, home prices are surging so rapidly that middle-class residents are wondering if they can still afford to stay in the state. Over the past 6 months, home prices have risen faster than those of any other state, according to a Washington Post analysis of Zillow data. Wages in the state, on the other hand, have grown at a slower rate than the national average. If I did not have my house, I could not rent right now in Pensacola on my income, said one local resident, who earns about $40,000 in annual salary from her council job and Social Security. She said, I would be living in my car. The median $1,350 rent is nearly double what it used to be a year ago. This has been mentally brutal, and it's draining on the adults and it's draining on the kids, another resident said in an interview with the Washington Post. They can put all of this new shiny stuff across the state, but it doesn't help anything if nothing is affordable. Nationwide, the median asking rent for one-bedroom apartments rose by 10% or more in 56 of the 100 largest cities in the U.S. compared to a year earlier. In 34 of the 100 largest cities, one-bedroom rents jumped by 15% or more. In 20 of those cities, rent spiked by 20% or more, and in 11 of them, rent spiked by 25% or more. Many of the cities with the largest year-over-year rent spikes are medium-sized cities with more modest incomes, reported economic analyst Wolf Richter. And if it wasn't enough, prices for energy services have grown at least 10% compared to the same time in 2021. For those relying on natural gas for their utilities, the increase is 24%. This is particularly disturbing right now as winter makes it harder for cash-strapped households to keep their homes warm. Meanwhile, gasoline prices have soared by 50% nationally and almost 70% in some states, including California. Needless to say, for lower and middle-income earners who currently depend on gasoline to get to and from work, these higher costs have been exceedingly painful. If a commuter spent $100 per month on gasoline a year ago, now they spend around $150 to $170, and that money has to come from somewhere. With monthly budgets getting tighter, the only alternative for many is to use their credit cards. Inflation, unexpected bills, or a drop in income. Any one of these things can put a middle or low-earning household in a precarious situation, highlighted analysts with the Penn Wharton Budget Model and Institute, who recently released a report in association with Gallup to measure the impact of inflation by household income. The results found that roughly two-thirds, or 67% of lower-income adults, have experienced severe hardship due to rising prices. For their part, 56% of middle-income Americans have reported severe financial difficulties in the past 12 months. The survey also found that about 8 in 10 Americans expect inflation to rise, a higher expectation than usual. The wages of both groups are rising more slowly today compared to the historic norm, explained James Ziliak, director of the Center for Poverty Research at the University of Kentucky. He noted that when you adjust middle and low-income workers' wages for inflation, you see real declines in their earning power. Overall, the firms concluded that Americans view the economy more negatively than positively, with 67% saying it is getting worse. In essence, all of this means that the American dream is becoming more elusive for the U.S. middle class, and some economists are warning that this group is getting smaller with each passing year. The fact that about 7.4 million people have lost ground in the occupations that used to be ladders to middle-class lives for them and their families means that more and more Americans are destined to a future of financial uncertainty. A new study released last week noted that these workers have been displaced from millions of the precise jobs that offer them upward mobility, said Papia DeBroy, head of research for Opportunity at Work, the nonprofit that published the study. It represents a stunning loss for workers and their families. It also represents a tragic loss for the economy. While wealthier consumers are better placed to stock up on consumer goods when shortages are imminent, most people can't cut down on necessities such as groceries and heating. This widening rich-poor inflation imbalance is known by economists as income inequality. And when these workers who form the base of our economy cannot engage in spending to stimulate economic growth, things start to crumble fairly quickly, especially when the access to affordable food is compromised. For those who have been living paycheck to paycheck, the rising prices of everything are making some prioritize paying rent or buying food, while others are living in their cars. The once great and strong America now seems far from the reach of everyday Americans. Day by day, it gets harder to afford the soaring cost of living. And considering the chaotic outlook for 2022, we should start bracing for some awfully dark times. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video informative, please don't forget to leave it as a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.